Okay, well, on behalf of my esteemed colleagues, Rachel and Joe and myself, Nick, welcome to our presentation about project initiation. And Brene Brown speaks about leadership being a vulnerable act, and so I thought I would be a little bit vulnerable and say I'm kind of nervous, you know, a little bit anxiety, and so I'm going to share with you a practice that I do when I'm in that sort of position where I'm feeling a bit anxious or something important is going on. So I invite you to sit on the chair, kind of with your feet flat on the ground and your back as straight as possible. And this is called a coherence test. So I invite you to close your eyes if you're comfortable with that, or you can lower them. And this practice releases stress, and it balances your emotions, and it's called a heart coherence practice. And this is when your heart is in coherence with your mental rhythms, your heart rhythms, and your body rhythms. That's what athletes would term being in the zone. And you can do this anytime, anywhere, and no one will know. But the first time you do it, for this first step, which is focusing on your heart, sometimes makes it a bit easier the first few times you do it to put your hand in your heart. So I invite you to put your hand there and just bringing your attention to your chest. And the second step is heart breathing. So you're breathing in and out. Try to have a sense that your breath is blowing in and out through your heart. And this third step, heart feeling, is the most important step. And activate a good positive experience that you've had, a really special time. Could be when you were at some special place. Could be a special time with a loved one. It could be, for me, I think of the first time I held my daughter, my firstborn child, the first time I held a baby when I became a dad. And try and really step back into that time and relive it. And this practice has been demonstrated to bring your heart rhythms, your mental rhythms, and your body rhythms into coherence, and it improves your cognitive function and your actual physical coordination as well, and it's used by athletes and all sorts of people. So whenever you're ready, you can just open your eyes. Welcome back. And just to introduce you to some of the themes that we have here, I'm going to speak about leadership in the 21st century context. And one of the quotes we have up here is from Otto Scharmer of MIT. It says, "The successful leadership," they interviewed a whole host of people, and successful leadership, they found, depends on the quality of attention and intention that a leader brings to a situation. And this practice that we just did gives you a sense of how you can shift the inner place from which you're coming, and that can really have a profound effect on your interactions with others. And I thought this came up quite interestingly in class yesterday when Jürgen said the most important conversations we have are in our own heads. So I thought that kind of worked in quite nicely with that theme. And another idea is this idea of complexity leadership, which we also explored in class yesterday. Leadership of the many, by the many. And there's a quote from a couple of the heavyweight scholars of complexity theory here that speak about leadership as being something that emerges in the interactions between people, and rather than some positional power or some individual's power, it's something that's shared by many people in order to respond to large and complex situations. So I'll hand you over to Joe here.
Yeah, and those quotes were really kind of things that we identified with as we went through this whole process. They kind of represented that bit to us. But as we started off, we had to come up with, all right, so what are some of our own assumptions about what we're dealing with here? Is this just how we frame, basically, project initiation? Really, we're just project identified. This is about project managers and organizations. Sources of our projects may just be from organization. We're addressing organizational strategy. Maybe it's a multi-year operations and development plan, like if you work for council or in sort of an infrastructure projects. Or it may be a larger project where you have an actual project within there of like a discovery phase project. I think we've been on some of those. The goals of project initiation address how to define those values and benefits of the project and your outcomes. It really comes down to it doesn't come down to it, but the actual kind of practical stuff that you do is develop a business case and seek authorization for funding. So our goal is to really get the project off on sound footing. And of course that involves the stakeholders. And at this point, the stakeholders are not committed in a way. You're bringing them together, so keep that in mind. Their commitment comes a little later. Our own journey kind of to discover what our question is here, what's the big challenge, leadership challenge with initiation, came back to the book. So with the Coleman and McNichol, they posed two sides to what project initiation involves, and that's the shaping and the scoping. So shaping is influenced, so there's some influence in there going on. And those are the people in the different camps and such that are have an interest in your project. The scoping side is sort of the questions that are going to come out of what you do to drive the project. And we start to look at some of the interactions between those. And this is just our own cognitive mapping and just a fun exercise we did on the whiteboard. And out of it, we came up with some what's happening and ideas like project coherence and strategic alignment, organizational change, shared vision, managing expectations. These are ideas that kind of came out of it when we looked at all this together. So that's over, Rachel.
Thank you, Joe. So as recounted by Joe, our journey in arriving at the Leadership Challenge went on through the mapping, like I showed you earlier, this map, where specifically shaping and scoping, how does a leader really shape and scope a project? So what is really project initiation to us, both from our opinion and from the literature? And we recognize that all project leaders communicate all the time. So we zeroed in on that aspect, communication. And then we began with the question that how does a leader unify diverse stakeholders? But then as we went through the process, we realized that it's only half of the picture. It's not the whole picture, because as leaders, unify stakeholders, they're also faced with the challenge of fleshing out, of bringing out various assumptions and opportunities during project initiation. So our question, our leadership challenge became, how does a project leader unify a diverse group of stakeholders toward a common goal, yet at the same time, leverage their diversity to uncover assumptions and reveal hidden opportunities? So for us, this is a real challenge that is faced by project leaders during the initiation phase, especially since Joe earlier cleared out that the goal of project initiation is just to set the project off on a sound footing, to prepare the project for the next stage. And so, how does a leader do all this? We posit that a leader can overcome this challenge through several frameworks on leadership and learning, which we'll be discussing later, and also through practical tools born from our collective experience as project managers. We also have interviewed some colleagues, which we'll be sharing with you later. So our proposal to uncover this challenge is twofold. First is from a conceptual theoretical perspective through the frameworks, and second is through practical experiential tools. And so now I hand you over to Nick to discuss the slides.
So we're going to do a little experiment with you now. Hopefully we'll have sound here.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Just minimize that.
Alright, seems to have gone back to the beginning or something. Okay, sorry about that. So, just in the context of that experiment, I'm going to introduce this model which is called the ladder of inference. And it's about how we observe reality and how we filter things out and how we start making decisions about what we pay attention to and what we don't. And at the bottom of this ladder we have observable experience that's captured by the video camera in the video that we just watched. Oh, this isn't going backwards anymore for some reason. I'll just put them all up there. We should have gone the other way, but we select data from what is the observable experience based on what we think is important. So in this instance we observe the white teams passing only. We add our own cultural meanings to that. So here we have determined what the exact number of passes are that are made by the white team. We make our own assumptions, and so we've assumed that that is the most important thing that our attention needs to be on during the focus of this exercise. We count those 13 passes, we feel that we've nailed it, we're really pleased with ourselves, and we carry on with our project or with the presentation, and we've completely missed that moonwalking bear. Now that might not seem like much to you, but that might be the assumptions made in the business case of the cross-city tunnel about where traffic flows from one side of the city to the other. Or in the space Columbia exercise that we did yesterday, that might be the lives of 7 astronauts based on assumptions made about that foam impact. So we're going to introduce some modes of learning here that are called double and triple loop learning. And it's really about inquiring into the paradigms and assumptions and the worldviews that we impose on reality in the way that we perceive it, but also about the internal place from which we come, which is more in this level of triple loop learning, which is looking at our sense of purpose and how we show up in the world. And there's a practice that we can use to develop those double and triple loop learning in the moment, both as individuals and collectively, and that's known as action inquiry. And so a couple of examples of action inquiry questions that we could use to drill into our assumptions are like, what are the assumptions that my strategy is based upon? So if they had done that in the case of the cross-city tunnel, they might have been looking at what the assumptions were about the traffic flow through the tunnel that made them end up going bankrupt. And looking at whether these assumptions are based on data or upon beliefs. And drilling into beliefs, we might say, what kind of conceptual model am I using here, and is it filtering reality in a way that's appropriate? And to look at triple loop learning, it's more about how we are showing up as a leader, and so is the quality of my presence charged with the right energy to communicate my intention and to bring people together around a shared vision in this project situation.
And to continue on that, another way to uncover assumptions is through using Theory U, which emphasizes on the art of listening. Now, this is not new. You all know that listening is important. Even Otto Scharmer himself, the proponent of this theory, said that Theory U will not teach you anything new. Instead, it will allow you to realize, and it reiterates, how listening allows a leader to move from this stage where he is now to where he wants to be in the future. Through listening, he will be able to listen to himself in the beginning. He will be able to uncover his own assumptions, his own beliefs, but it does not stop there. He must make himself vulnerable. He must make himself have an open mind, an open heart, and an open will. And through this, he will evolve from just seeing his own perceptions and assumptions to also seeing other perceptions and assumptions of his stakeholders and of other people. And one way that Theory uses how to do that is through stakeholder interviews. And these stakeholder interviews have carefully designed questions that suspend the judgment, questions that suspend the voice of fear or the voice of cynicism. So when all of these are suspended, when all of these are not present, then a leader with an open mind, open heart, and open will can communicate to his stakeholders as well. And through these interviews, an environment that fosters trust and fosters openness will be developed, and that will also allow the stakeholders to do the same. So, Jürgen mentioned reciprocity earlier. So, if a leader begins to having this open mind, open heart, and open will, the stakeholders will feel it, and then suspending the voice of judgment, voice of cynicism, voice of fear, the environment will be trust will be developed in the environment. And given this, that the leader has an open mind, open heart, and open will, and the stakeholder is able to do that, both will be able to create a coherent and shared vision. A new picture will emerge, not just the leaders' viewpoints or perspectives. They will move from just conforming to each other and confronting to each other to connecting and co-creating a new picture and a new vision. So in project initiation, that's very important, uncovering all assumptions and together creating a new vision. So I'll now hand you over to Joe for the next slide. So Nick.
And just going back slightly to this slide here, when you do come down into this area here, forming a shared vision in a generative way where you come together to co-create your highest potential, that creates the conditions for emergence to evolve. And that was something we looked at yesterday in complexity leadership, is this emergence leadership. And we tried to capture some of that in our presentation by taking things that we learned yesterday in class and embedding them into the presentation yesterday afternoon, because that was like allowing what was emergent in the moment to inform our decision making, and that sort of captures the idea of projects, using that emergence to not be fixated on certain ideas and to be continuously responding and adapting in the most effective way possible. So we're just going to do a little experiment now, so I'll invite everyone to stand up quickly and to form in this area here where there's some open space. Hopefully we've got enough room, it's a little bit tight.
Just not a circle, but just
stand around the cluster.
And spread out as well. So we're going to participate. We're going to stand over here.
So I'd just invite you not to make any major movements, move very quickly or anything like that, but to look around and without indicating to the person, choose 2 random people in the room without indicating that to them in any way. So. And once you've selected those people, we now have to rearrange yourself without any big sudden movements, without moving outside of this kind of confined space we're in, so that we're equidistant between those 2 people that we've selected.
You got it? All clear? So look around, don't make too much eye contact. Pick 2 people elsewhere, and then walk so that you're positioning yourself equidistant between those 2 people. So in the middle. Equal distance between the 2.
No, keep moving until you're equidistant. Just keep.
When can we stop?
When you're equidistant, you just stop. Is that us? So it falls apart a couple of times. Read it.
But notice we're constantly, we move a bit faster at first, but then we move slower. We kind of fine-tune where we're going here.
So you can all sit down again now, but this experiment is introducing this notion of shared leadership that is used in complexity theory. And it's about this adaptive leadership that emerges between groups of people. And if you imagine that exercise there, if we had one single leader trying to coordinate everyone so that they were all equidistant to other people they had chosen, you can imagine it might take a very long time. And so, yeah, this adaptive leadership is a sort of emergent form of practice that's trying to respond to the rates of change and the rate of complexity that we have in the project environment these days. And so it's about enabling conditions for networked and distributed leadership to arise, and that might be across entire supply chains operating as if they're one organisation. It's about self-organising and trusting the collective intelligence of the system. And the metaphor for that is like a living system, so you could imagine the antibodies in your body are self-organising and respond to threats in the environment in a collective fashion, but without having any hierarchical single leadership. And one way of looking at that is leadership of the many by the many, and if you look at it in evolutionary terms, we had anarchy, then oligarchy, which is the dominant leadership assumption in this moment, and now we're moving towards this idea of polyarchy, which is leadership of the many by the many. And to bring that down into a bit more of a concrete example, we can look at the design and implementation of 2 different aircrafts. There's the F-35 military aircraft in the US, which was built, and the project was initiated and formed with a command and control type of leadership structure. And There's discrete military forces involved, the Air Force, Marines, Navy. It's a very fragmented stakeholder group and supply chain. And the result has been that it's gone almost 100% over budget, and depending on where you get your information from, 5 to 7 years over schedule. If we look in comparison to that to the Boeing 777, which used and initiated itself with a complex adaptive form of leadership, this self-organising leadership of the many by the many. They had networked self-organising teams, and that involved entire supply chains, customers, everyone all working together that spanned the organisational boundaries. And it was 4 years from inception to delivery, when an average aircraft takes 10 years, and it revolutionised transatlantic travel and is the most successful aircraft of its kind. So I'll hand you back to Joe.
Yeah, if you can remember, if you could think with the exercise, the walking exercise we did, using that there, how, if we had a command control trying to organize how people stood in proximity to their 2 other people, how much longer that may have taken than by doing it ourselves. And certainly we would have run out of time in our presentation had we demonstrated the other one. So, and we kind of bring it back down, so this gets to, all right, so we have these theories and these ideas, and how does this actually start to look on the ground? And this is a point I maybe encourage you to think about how it fits with what your experiences have been. And we're going to go along the lines of things that we've learned and bring it to more of a practical level. So again, our goal is about creating this sense of optimism and unity within a project team, and as well as with our stakeholders. And this really involves, in a sense, creating this microculture. All right, we'll come back to that in the next slide, I believe. But keep that in mind, a microculture here. So, and when a leader thinks about stakeholders, we want to, as we mentioned, we're about motivating them. We also need to ask why, kind of to get to that shared vision and clear vision, asking why and what are their benefits and outcomes that they see, that they feel this project is about and represents for them. And this is, once we have that, we can also think about how they play a key role in that, and that ties in with the adaptive leadership as well. So one of the ideas that's come out too about a best of leadership approach in project initiation is this laissez-faire approach. And if you remember from transformational leadership, that was one of the earlier stages. And in that sense, it was kind of considered not a very transformational one. It's almost like it was a developmental process there. But there are some ideas that maybe laissez-faire is a good idea, or it has some advantage in the initiation. And that's similar to what we talked about here, is that the leader itself avoids making decisions as a way of not setting the parameters and the boundaries for a project early. So that's going to affect people's assumptions that you want to really uncover. You give the responsibility to the team. So like in our walking example here, everyone else had to decide where they were going as opposed to by a leader. And the leader doesn't use authority either. So maybe sets like some of the parameters about what's happening, kind of frames things up in a big way, but doesn't really, and keeps track of time, of course, but doesn't kind of get into the details about, oh, this and this. It's not that point yet in the project. Of course, we have to recognize too, like we mentioned, we're trying to leverage the diversity here, and we know if you've done more, had some other classes and stuff, you may have come across the idea of wicked problems, and this arises out of stakeholder diversity, where we have stakeholders coming in with their different mindsets and different frame of minds for that day or that moment, or just their careers. A lot of times, as we saw with the Columbia example, people come together, there's a social complexity there of differences that need to be resolved that sort of is going to cloud how the project gets delivered and how it comes together and people get unified. And these create wicked problems that are basically the behavioral problems in projects that I'm sure we've all encountered too. So, okay, so hands together, working together. So let's turn this back to Rachel for this one. Or is this mine? It's mine, okay. So there's other ways, so now there's some real practical ways to do this. So as we talk about engaging stakeholders and keeping that diversity in mind and how that may lead to wicked problems, there's a couple, we frame it kind of as two big ways to do this. So there's engagement, essentially. So there's engagement tools, and sometimes with these engagement tools, there's personal, we do it personally, or we can do it collectively as a group. So personal examples may be interviews that we hold, and then we collect all the interviews and we present a formal proposal. A Delphi technique where you could use in a group, that's more of an individual anonymous effort, would work. is another idea. We also have stakeholder workshops where people come together. We've said, these are the things we want to talk about today. And I think from my recent experiences, what works well in there is give people a chance to speak and talk in front of the group. If they're not so comfortable with that, give them other opportunities to write down notes and such, and then be able to take those notes. We had one where we had essentially whiteboards, and then people answered questions and on Post-it notes and put those up on the boards. And then we walked around and looked at those. And that's another way for people who may be more introverted to get their opinions out and thoughts out and contribute to the group in a meaningful way. So the other important part, not to forget, as we're not only preparing our business case, and as from the project steps side of things, is how to start the process of planning for engagement of the stakeholders throughout the project. So at this point, we don't need to necessarily have an engagement plan or management plan, but we need to start thinking about who identify our stakeholders are, mapping their interests, things like not only who they are and how available they are for this project potentially, where their interests are, what we think they may have some influence and power in this project, where in the which life cycle maybe, which stage in the life cycle might they be most critical to engage with. So these are some of the ideas that a leader thinks about when starting to work with stakeholders. So from recent experience and some of our interviews, we did some interviews and with project managers saying, what are some of the ways that work for you to unify people, bring out the diversity that they have to really contribute to a well-rounded project? And in general, what it kind of comes down to is the project. If we can use an approach here, almost like a metaphor, the project manager almost becomes like a producer here, a director. It's a little bit director, but not like actually directing, but sort of setting up a stage where the actors can move around and engage and such, but they step outside of there and kind of let it happen. So again, our challenge was about developing a shared and clear vision. So what do we do? People are coming into this, if we're having workshops, right? They're coming into these meetings and they're thinking about their day. You recognize other people like, oh, you're that boss over there, or it's like, oh, why are you here, sort of thing. They're bringing in their mental models. They're bringing in their previous preconceptions. Do we think this is going to work for creating a shared vision? Probably not. So one example that we've used and that's also been shown is metaphor. All right? Metaphor. So we know what metaphor is. It's kind of, in this case, it would be like a simulation where we pretend, we step outside, something is, we frame like perhaps our project meeting here, our discussion as something else. In this act, it opens up creativity. Our goal, it opens up creativity, it lets people leave things behind. If we can make this an enjoyable environment, a laughing environment, a fun environment, even better. It lets people kind of release what's behind them. If we leave the titles and job descriptions at the door, have people interact in different groups. Through this metaphor, it allows people to be creative and such. And when they're creative, it lets the ideas flow better. And this is where we start to develop this idea of a microculture. And this is really what we want in this project, right? If you think about, we're part of a larger culture, but if we can create a microculture that works together well in the project now and later on, I think there's greater sense of success there. And a lot of times if you can come back to that metaphor throughout the life of the project and remember why we're here for, it's a great opportunity there. There's an author, McKinnon, 2008, did some case studies with organizations about using metaphor to help them come up with vision, and it proved to be rather successful. Another good example, an objective is that setting the environment to enable innovative thinking. Catmull is a CEO of Pixar Studio, and they have a great process where they leave these sort of things that don't work, that kind of cloud the creativity and the innovative thinking. They leave those at the door, and they have these meetings that really work effectively like this. So I'd encourage you to read up on that if you're interested. They've operationalized it. We're talking about a project here, but here we go. So I mentioned neuroscience here. It's another idea to follow. Maybe you're going to have some comments later about this. Had a lot to share earlier.
And this ties in with the theory you slide that we showed about having an open mind and an open heart and an open will, putting people into that creative space where they move out of their habitual responses and drop their agendas, allows something new to emerge between the team that's not based on, reconfirming people's old ideas or agendas.
Right. You see? Is it the orange game?
I don't know, do we have time?
Do we have time? How's the time?
Are you managing that tool?
Oh.
I'm managing
Oh, you are?
30 minutes.
Already? Okay.
Yeah, so I don't think we have time really.
Okay. Then we'll pass it. All right.
We did have a little, another little experiment we were going to do, but we're sort of out of time, so...
How long will it take?
5 minutes. Okay, good. We'll do this experiment. So, all right, what we're going to have is pretend that I'm going to pass out roles here. We're going to need Andres. Why don't you pair up back here? And so just form groups of 2. You guys say it's a group of 3. Jürgen, you can join in a group if you'd like, over the camera. And so what we're doing here, you see I've brought some oranges. We are the market, or the vendor. We're selling oranges. And what's happening here is that, and this is something you may want to try as a metaphor exercise if you're ever at a workshop and wanting people to come together. So I'm going to pass this out, and each of your groups is going to have a role. All right? And you have a way on these cards here. It's about you need to use the oranges. You have a job, and you need the oranges. So the task here is to figure out how you can use the oranges. How you can get the oranges to use to meet your need here.
Do we need that one up, or is that it up?
So there, no, we don't need to show it. Okay, good. So take 30 seconds. We'll do this quickly. Take 30 seconds to think about how you may.
So are we competing for the oranges, or are we thinking about how we would use them once we have them?
Well, think about at this point. Think about how you can get the oranges. Just pretend they're real oranges. All right? Tell me when everybody has an idea about how you. All right. So now think about together. All right. So I want you to negotiate amongst yourself. Take 2 minutes or so to figure out how you can get it. Remember, these are competing people who want the oranges. So who should we give the orange? We're the vendor. Who should we give it to?
So 1 box of oranges, 4 people want the oranges.
1 box of oranges. 4 different teams. 4 different people want the oranges. Help us figure out how to who should get the oranges.
I want the orange.
So,
Should I talk to you?
Yes.
Yeah,
Joe,
let's go
get
first.
the orange, please. And you need all the oranges. There's a crate of. I have 1 crate of oranges left. Your team, you need all the oranges.
Let me show you the diagram.
I would recommend talking to people.
What do you have oranges?
So with teachers, we've got a class that, and we need the whole.
Well, no, it's fine. We're going to search the oranges, but for a different purpose, which is a greater purpose.
What would you need?
We need for dessert.
What would you need?
For the
You need the buckets. So
So from the orange.
We can take the photos.
Yeah, if you don't.
The juice of the orange. We need the
We still floating as a product.
What do you guys need?
For eating, yeah.
These guys need to collect dead. So.
Oh, no, we have this.
We are researchers, they are teachers,
The artist, you need to take a picture with oranges. That's it. So
And we need for dessert for 4 kids.
they will be consuming the
Well,
oranges.
how are you using the, what do you need for dessert?
I need the orange peel.
Oh, right. So if you guys take the photo,
And then
and
we're
then
gonna
you
take
get
the
the
peel.
rind,
yeah.
and you can get the juice, and we can get the 6 pepperons.
Yeah, that's the sequence.
Okay, do we have an answer?
Yes.
All right. Who do we give the oranges to?
First, the photographer.
Well,
To who?
yes,
We're the
we need
photographers.
to take some
Okay.
pictures.
So we'll only need them for, say, an hour or so.
Okay. And then what?
Then we'll pass them.
To us. To us.
Okay, who are you?
I'm the charity person. I'm gonna use the peel
Yeah?
to make dessert for charity purpose. So like,
Okay, so you just need the peel?
yeah.
Okay, so just need the peel. You need to take the photos, so we'll give them you intact, and then you pass them on to them,
Yeah.
and then, all right, so then what? So wait, what
We
about,
have
you need,
researchers, we need
sorry?
the juice.
You need,
We need the juice.
Okay.
Orange juice to do our research to on the cancer study.
Okay.
So yeah.
and you don't need the rinds for the peels for it?
Yeah.
You don't need them whole? Okay.
We have the rind.
Sounds like it's nailed it, doesn't it?
All right, and
So,
then,
and then we after have used the juice, we will keep the seeds to create the dishes.
Just pay first, we all share the,
Yeah.
we'll just pull our money, and then with the money we save, we get drinks. How's that?
perfect. Excellent. So you solved a very simple task there. You can use this as like an ice-breaking exercise if you have a workshop where you may have diverse stakeholders that need to come together from different offices, complex problem or whatever that you want to unify. Sense that you see the sense here that we're trying to do this. We use metaphor for creativity. So as a reward, each team gets a prize.
We get two?
Real orange oil.
No, maize
So,
with
a little bit back to what we talked about yesterday too, you now have this sense of smell, sense of taste, feel.
We have that common sense.
So just to tie it all up then, everyone, leadership challenge and project initiation, going back to our initial question, how do we create a coherent and shared vision? We try to actively listen and gather perspectives from all the various stakeholders. We try to bring people together in a way that they're not trying to push an agenda or their own perspective, but in a much more open and generative way where you can co-create their highest potential together. And there's also the possibility of, in that initiation stage in particular, to try and foster the conditions where shared leadership emerges between those stakeholders. And to uncover unknown assumptions and opportunities, we can leverage the diversity of those stakeholders using individually and collectively the tools of double and triple loop learning, action inquiry, and we can do workshops that move people into a more creative and generative space where they step out of their habitual behaviours and remove the hierarchical constraints that sometimes really manoeuvre projects in a certain direction. So if we take out that hierarchical sort of bias, then often from the lower levels within an organisation, leadership can emerge and direction can emerge that's much more focused on a positive outcome for the project.
Thanks for your attention. Any questions? Answers? Any sense that this may be useful in your projects? Right. Thanks very much. Although I'm waiting, there's probably a question from the back of the room. Go ahead.
I'd like to know a little bit more, because I didn't get quite well. How can we apply this triple loop model to the stakeholder engagement?
I've got like a whole bunch of stuff in the appendix here. So I think
A brief explanation.
here is a bunch of questions that are designed to uncover double and triple loop learning. So you can use these questions as a resource, either when you're writing your reflective journal after the fact, but if you have the presence of mind in the moment, you can ask yourself these questions and say, you know, what do I feel is my purpose here? What's taking shape and what am I afraid of letting go of? What agendas do I have that I can't let go of that's maybe preventing something new from emerging? So there's a whole bunch of them there, but
And I think
that's a really effective way of doing it.
And I think our idea too with setting up a creative space, the workshop as a creative space is to let the team and tying that with emergent leadership is letting our stakeholders together their kind of free themselves of their bounds so that they can answer these questions more authentically. Would be a way. So
the approach would be then to have a set of questions, talk to the different stakeholders, so you can have a wider, broader idea of what are they thinking.
So if you remember when I was on this slide about double and triple loop learning, there was a tool that's known as action inquiry. or its full name is Collaborative Developmental Action Inquiry, and that's actually goes way beyond just asking a set of questions, and it's actually a way of being and a way of living where you're constantly in inquiry into what is this that's happening in my experience, and that can be in your personal life, that could be in your professional life, and it's actually a really good way to approach difficult challenges and problems, because if you approach them from a position where you're inquiring into it with curiosity rather than trying to push some preconceived idea of what the right outcome is, then people are much more open to explore new ideas. So it's a really deep and profound practice, and it's a great reading. It links from the Adaptive Leadership chapter of the Northcote book. It's all about developmental action inquiry. I'd recommend reading that if you're interested.
I think there's some ways, so you may customize how you phrase some of these questions with the stakeholders instead of asking them directly, but it's sort of the mindset that goes behind the questions a little bit, and you can engage them directly. Or our idea with a workshop and a creative workshop was do it sort of in a gentle nudging way, so that when you're addressing these sorts of thoughts that go behind the questions in a workshop, that they're not going to be burdened with their day-to-day responsibilities and their job descriptions and such.
So it seems to be more about values and principles, which might be
I think so.
actionable by
that's
throwing questions or having workshops.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, thanks.
So this turning theory into practice.
Right.
And I think just to add to that, one of the challenges, having a list of questions like that is great for you to every so often pull out and read, to maybe even print up and have them at your desk when you have a stakeholder workshop to put those questions up in front of people. But also find if you really want to internalize this, make it part of your everyday life, it's read through all of them and find the 2 or 3 questions that really resonate with you, that help you to think through, or that just help prompt you to think through things slightly differently. Take those 3 out, write them on a card, put them in your wallet, put them on your phone and your screensaver, and very soon you'll actually get to memorize those. And then every day, just make a point of going through, not necessarily all of them, but those 2 or 3 that have helped you to think things through. And then every time you face a decision, every time you engage with somebody, it's just to stop and say, okay, question 1, question 2, question 3, think through. So one of them for me is, how else can I look at this? Which is implied in some of the questions you see up there. How else can I look at this? When somebody asks me or tells me something, or I disagree, but I first say, well, hold on, how else can I look at this? And then it just challenges me to track my own thinking first. Great. Any other questions that you have for the initiation team?
Just to try to sum up in a less theoretical way, put down these limits. So during the scoping and initiation phase, your recommendation for us is to actively listen to the stakeholders and to be aware about the personal biases and assumptions. Just checking with you guys, am I getting the information?
Yes.
Am I missing anything else?
I think the other aspect I would throw in is think about using like a metaphor scenario, like say, let's come up with a movie that represents what we're trying to do here to create this vision or to create this team cohesion. What's maybe a movie that this represents, and maybe we can identify with characters and we'll like say, oh, we're like this, and it creates this fun environment, creates a little bit of creativity and innovative thinking. You can use metaphor like a game at the beginning of the workshop, like as an icebreaker exercise. I mean, people are coming in the meeting and they're a little nervous, a little tense, a little busy thinking about what today is, and if they can leave that behind, icebreaker exercise, and start to relate to each other more in that creative space, you get more positive outcomes from your meetings and such. So
creating a more relaxed environment to let people let loose and
don't make it so busy. Don't make it so busy.
To express themselves.
Try not to fixate on some outcome that you think it has to be, and having a degree of openness to see what is it that comes out when we bring everyone together, and trying to encourage others not to be fixated on a specific outcome, so that you can get the best outcome for the collective and for the organisation.
I don't know if it works for like construction projects, but
Yeah, like you said, it's probably the ideal scenario, but in real life, oftentimes we have like deadline and dues, and they're all very, very bound by the time. And
in this early shaping and scoping stage, it's really generally much more senior people that are involved, and the project is much more malleable. It's still being born. It still could turn out to be a whole bunch of different things. So it's and yeah, it will be time bound, but usually there's a bit more openness to have fluidity in what is going to come out of it, and it's about bringing that nebulous thing together into something a bit more coherent.
Thank you. I think you mentioned, Joe, that it may not work for something concrete like a construction project. I think there's definitely elements of it that could, however, for instance, if you're setting the objectives or defining the benefits to come from a project, then having that broader, more creative approach to thinking and approach to brainstorming.
Or you could kind of tailor your creative metaphor-y sort of approach to the environment. So we used oranges here. We used this in our workshop because this was for a government project that people just needed to kind of talk to each other and figure out a new strategy. So we figured a game like the orange one, where we had people's interests had to be kind of framed in a different way would work. Maybe in a construction project, you have them play with Legos or something like that in advance. Something they can identify with. So.
There was actually an exercise conducted by a friend of mine for a utilities company involving utilities work and a lot of construction work. They had multiple parties that were coming together, and one of the things that they did is organize a full-day workshop where they were split into teams, cross-company teams, so a few people from each company coming together. They had to then build a robotic device. One of them, they would have to fly a plane across the room, and they also had to build a cannon to try and shoot down the other team's plane or drone. So within their team, they had to both build the drone and build the cannon to try and defeat the other person's drone. And they had this massive ball. All the teams lined up on the two sides, and they built and designed everything. And at the end of it, they got to fly their drones and start shooting cannons. And just picture a whole lot of engineers and boys, and they had an absolute ball. And that project just went so smoothly because of that experience that they had at the beginning, and the metaphor of the war that just kept coming back through. As they went into difficult parts of the project, people would just suddenly say, "Oh, you're trying to shoot down my drone again." Say, "Oh, yeah, we are." Okay, but remember, the objective was that what they got rewarded for at the end of that day was actually to get all of the planes across to the other side. So, yes, we may have conflict at different points, but what is the ultimate objective that we're trying to get back to? And I do like the idea of that metaphor. Okay, thank you. Final opportunity, going once. Going twice.
Thank you so much.
And director says, cut.